and welcome to our panel discussion on media literacy, informational influence and societal resilience. My name is Salla Nazarenko and I'm the International Affairs Specialist at the Union of Journalists. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank City of Kouvolan and the organizers for partnering with us. I think this concept of comprehensive security needs everyone's attendance. And in these situations, I always like to quote my good friend, Professor Janne Saarekivi, who's a great fan of Finnish language, that we can have a great defense system, but in order for it to be credible, we also need democratic institutions to defend. And I believe media is one of them. But without wasting time on my stories, we'll start by introducing our very interesting speakers. First, here we have Ekaterina Glikman, whom I shall call Katja from now on. She's one of the founders and the first deputy editor-in-chief of Russian media in exile, Novaya Gazeta Europe, that was launched in April 2022, just 2 months after the beginning of the war. Katja currently lives in Switzerland, and previously she has worked for the independent Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta in Russia for over 20 years. In 2022, she received the Swiss Pro Literis Award and Press Emblem Campaign Award for her journalistic work. So welcome to Kouvola, Katja. Really happy to have you here. Then we have Veli-Pekka Kivimäki. He's from the Finnish Security and Intelligence Service, Supo. He works there as a senior analyst, and he's also a lecturer in social media analysis at Johns Hopkins University. Welcome, Veli-Pekka. And then we have Pauli Kopu, who is not representing KLOK. So I think it's a great irony that we have a panel on disinformation, then we have a mistake in the first slide. But he is an expert on disinformation and psychological defense. And unfortunately, Matti Posio fell ill, so we didn't let him come here with his stomach bug. But let's start with the concept of propaganda, which is something that we all think we have an idea of. And I think it's best to start with Katja. I often quote Hannah Arendt, because she has observed on totalitarian societies that the point of propaganda is not just to direct people towards one direction, but to confuse them and make them cynical and make sure they believe in nothing. And this is also my experience in working with doing studies on Russian journalism. But now, Katja, you left Russia years ago and currently you run Novaya Gazeta from exile. So how would you describe the effect on this propaganda on Russians today, right now? How does it affect on the society and what do you see from outside?
Hello everyone, thank you for having me. I start with real examples. Few members of my team, they had this situation in the family. Their parents reported them to FSB and police, not because they don't like them, but opposite. They love them, and this is how their love, they think, should be. They want to protect their kids. So these kids now walk from exile in my newspaper, and their parents lost them because of propaganda. Because and you know, they lost them, but they didn't change their views. So these views that they got from propaganda TV are more important for them than their own kids. And in some cases, it's the only kid they have. So this is how strong propaganda affects people. And, you know, I never had TV at home. Maybe you know that Putin's propaganda mainly poisoned people through TV. So I never had TV at home, and not because it's just disgusting to hear what they say there, but actually I would not guarantee that I would not fall for it. I don't know. I don't want to take this risk Because I see in my real life around me, I see that propaganda poisons all kind of people, poor and rich, any race, any religion or no religion, any, I don't know, taste in literature or not reading books at all, intelligent or not, with education or without education, whatever profession, whatever, all people are really not resilient to propaganda. So I actually would not try it myself. Even with my background, working for independent media so long, I don't have guarantee. In my family, it's also happened. My own uncle always told me that you are a very good person, Katya, but you were seduced by someone and you work for the enemy. The enemy, he named the enemy, it's my newspaper, Novaya Gazeta, which is the oldest independent media in Russia, and we lost 6 journalists. They've been killed. It's all happened in Putin time, and we just were doing our job, nothing else, always, like report on what's happening, that's it. We didn't do anything extra, something like to deserve this. But propaganda presented us as enemy just because we didn't keep quiet about things they don't like to be exposed. So, and people treat us as enemies. So not only state, but also people who are affected by propaganda, we are enemies for them. But also, there is no logic in these views. When people are in the situation, they are, no, I don't know, something bad happened, and there is no justice, and nobody to protect them, and government, it's not something where you come ask for help in Russia. So at the end, they come to us. And even when a few weeks ago they were treating us as an enemy, then when they are in desperate situation, they come to us and ask for help. So there is no logic also in people's heads. I shortly want to tell you how it works, this propaganda, so how shortly. First of all, state took over control of all media, almost all media. Of course, there is a bunch of us, but it's a very small group. Secondly, you might think that they lie, but actually lies are not the main mean to poison people with propaganda. The main thing is silence. Since you go critical against government, you disappear from radars. You can be politician, you can be journalist, you can be scientist, you can be whoever. You just disappear. You not exist, and people consume TV, and you are not on TV. So they don't know that you exist. They don't know that anyone who criticizes government exists. Also, some events disappear from media, like never happened. And we, independent media, who report on these events, report on these people, and report on critics, we cut off from people because, no, like now for sure we are in exile and we are blocked in the country, but even before, we had many obstacles to communicate with our readership before. So the result is people lost navigation in reality. They are disorientated. And interesting effect, which is corresponding with psychology, people start, when they have any doubts, they doubt themselves. they do not trust their own like feelings or intuition, and they also cannot check their doubts, because like it was also kind of conviction that propaganda in Russia used TV, but actually not. When people feel doubts what they heard from TV, they go to internet to check, and they find the same information in internet, because Russian propaganda occupied internet as well, very well. Even TikTok, full of propaganda. So people, and then algorithms of social media works, but even before this algorithm, there are a lot of resources and a lot of investment in social media from Russian state. So people just have no alternative. They cannot escape this circle. Since they are exposed and they are already in this media effect, they cannot escape it. It's very hard, psychologically hard, just technically hard. And so, and then they fake history, they rewrite history, they militarize, they force patriotism, they make people do not trust each other. And yeah, then we have this society which think that I actually hardly can name them society. I think it's just a crowd of people, because society not exists in Russia anymore. There are no institutions, there are no media, there are no NGOs, there are no structure. It's just people separated from each other, affected by propaganda and believing that Russia protect the country invading another country. They truly believe it. Here is the situation.
Thank you, Katja. That was grim and very, very moving and interesting. I think we'll go to Pauli now, because when we were preparing for this panel, you said that we Finns don't quite understand the strength of propaganda, that we think we are resilient, but we actually are not. So what are the things that we here in Finland should know and understand about propaganda?
All right, thanks for coming, and we have quite a crowd here. First of all, we discussed a little bit of the sort of framework that I like to use. We can think of propaganda, because propaganda is such a loaded word. So when we hear propaganda mentioned, we instantly go and think about something that goes back to the World War II with the posters, and that is the perception of propaganda. But nowadays and more modern times, it is more of a linear from white truth to whole pitch black lying. And in the middle, there is, of course, the gray area. And as Katja said, the gray area is very effective in creating confusion and creating misalignment along with people. So it's not necessary that we need to combat total lies, but we need to combat on the kind of gray area misinformation and disinformation. The core in all propaganda operations is somewhat always in the emotions. So journalists, and as Finns that are very focused on facts, we tend to miss the idea that propaganda is all about evoking some sort of emotion and getting some sort of effect from that emotion. And that is always the driver or somewhat of an undertone. For example, one of my bad example favorites is currently Dmitry Medvedev from Russia, who's always provoking these completely bizarre claims about nuclear weapons and next nuclear war, etc., etc. And those are probably the most extravagant and clear example of provoking and some sort of emotional response. Then I would like to go to my experiences with working with the Finnish government. So my background, how I am even talking here, is on Defense Forces reservist, on information defense. And because of that background, when we had the COVID situation in Finland and the global pandemic, the Prime Minister's office asked me to join and help for a week. And eventually I ended up being there for 14 months. And what I noticed during that time is that we have a lot of reliance in Finland that we're so educated that we can't be affected by information operations or any propaganda. And it might be so that the good education system and the good literature rate in Finland gives us some immunity. But we also noticed, and we all probably noticed here, that during the COVID pandemic, there was a hell of a lot of people who were actually against the vaccines, who were denying the whole truth about vaccines or the origins of COVID. And that is like, well, a good example on how information operations or disinformation works even in Finland. So I'm a little bit hesitant to just trust on the idea that we're so educated that we don't need to do anything. And it almost to me seems like it serves the purpose of we don't want to do anything. And that's where lies the sort of the danger, that if we just believe that we're so great that we can't be affected, which is not true, then we don't act accordingly.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Veli-Pekka, because you deal with informational influence and disinformation in your everyday work as well. So what kind of risks do you see in Finland at the moment? Just as an anecdote, I was just in Copenhagen meeting with my colleagues from other Nordic countries, and I told that there's been a lot of criticism towards media recently in Finland, so they were asking, is this Russian influence? I'm not sure about that, but maybe you would know, Veli-Pekka. So what do we need to know about the phenomena at this very moment?
So I think we can't talk about the situation with informational influence without sort of the backdrop of what has actually happened over the past few years, and just the fact that the war started. That's been a big change that affects everything around us, the security environment in Europe, and also what kind of influencing we may see. And certainly the big factor that has changed in Finland is that we've become a NATO member now, which means that it's not just about Finland, but it's now about Finland as part of NATO. That's also then part of the targets of influencing. And we also shouldn't forget that we're also part of the sort of Western coalition, and part of the Western countries now supporting Ukraine as well, which also makes us part of that group of countries then as well as targets of influence. So Finland as such, we like to think that we're very important to the Kremlin, that we're always sort of top of mind of the Russian leadership, but that may not be the case. And we should think about that. What does it mean, this change, that how as part of NATO, as part of Europe supporting Ukraine, how are we going to be then targets of these influence efforts overall? And if we look at let's say the past 10 years and how the image of Finland has developed in Russia. So if we look at the Levada polls, for example, on how Finland is viewed inside of Russia, we've seen that there's been a slow degradation in how Finland is viewed, and Finland is not sort of necessarily viewed as friendly a country as before in Russia. And now outright through the NATO membership, then official Russian statements say that Finland is an unfriendly country now, which changes our position in their view. And it's interesting to see now what happens with the war is going to be important also in terms of what kind of influencing will happen, because the longer the war goes on, the more support there will be needed for Ukraine, and that this is where this war awareness might come in as well. That in the Western societies that and Finland as well, and Finland has been a major supporter for Ukraine as well. That are there any divisions here inside of Finland that start happening with these issues? For example, that financial aid that's going to Ukraine, is that away from Finland, and could that be a theme that's used in influence campaigns? So these are the kinds we might be seeing. And if we look at NATO and what's happened with enhanced force presence, EFP, in the Baltic countries since 2014, there's been steady influence and disinformation campaigns targeted at the NATO presence in those countries. So these are the kinds of things that we might be seeing then through the growing NATO presence in Finland as well. So I think these changes in the security environment overall are the kinds of things that we now need to take into account, where we might see then new types of influence activities that we haven't seen before.
Can you give an example of one activity so that we can tackle it right away?
So, for example, if we look at the EFP presence in the Baltic countries, there's been cases where the foreign troops inside of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, they're presented as basically causing trouble, and there's been setups where these troops have been provoked into fights, basically, and the short social media clips is made of these situations where a soldier might be beating somebody up, and then that's then spun as a story that, hey, these NATO troops here are just beating people up. Why are they even here? They should leave the country, etc. So these are the kinds of things that we've seen in the Baltics, and something that should be also considered here.
Did you want to comment? So yes, so definitely as we hear, the information environment is very different, very murky compared to what it was just a few years ago. And in Finland we boast that we have great media literacy, great media education programs and so on and so forth, but it's still not enough in this environment. So how do we secure a safer information environment for all citizens? How do we learn to navigate in this really rapidly changing and dangerous environment? What can be done? And also to Katja, I would like to ask, you've been living in Europe for a couple of years now, so how do you feel about the media education, media literacy education efforts here, looking at it coming from Russia? Maybe you start and then we continue with others.
Yeah, I have very contradictional experience. My Russian horrible background, and then now I live in Switzerland, in country of direct democracy. So I really have a lot to compare. I'm very often invited in Swiss schools to talk to Swiss kids. They use me like, survivor from a horrible country, and so I can tell them how it can be actually, and I like very much that teachers think about it, think about how fragile is democracy. Even in such country like Switzerland, like in the middle of Europe, with such long history of democracy, and yet they are concerned and they think it makes sense to introduce my horrible experience to these kids. But they invite me only to high classes, like 16, 18 years old kids who definitely go to the university. And I think you should start actually earlier and not only focus on kids who go to the university, but all of them, because it's quite important. And also, as a newcomer, I was very surprised how much people read in Switzerland. I see people with newspapers everywhere. Like I walk through the town and I see them everywhere. They really read, and I was impressed in a good way, because Russians don't read. They just press the button and then consume these TV products, and This is not actually a good way to get yourself informed, even in free country. It's good to read always. But then when I looked closer to these impressive reading people, I noticed that they are all 40 plus. Okay, it's good that they read, but who are younger, they go to internet. And in internet they have ocean of the information, and there are two risks as I see them. First risk is there is no obvious difference between professional journalists and anonymous channels or whatever, bloggers. You go to Telegram, you see news channel, and normal person like who is not really into media do not see difference. And behind my channel, my newspaper channel, there is a newspaper registered, follow journalistic standards, and also responsible. You can sue us if we do something wrong, not according to the law. And there are channels, news channels, that nobody knows who made them. And people, consumers, readers, they do not see difference. This is must be somehow in education system. People should see very clearly what is the source of information and is this information verified or not. And are there responsible people for this information? So this is one risk. And another risk, algorithms. I already mentioned before. Social media goal is to keep you on social media as long as possible. So you know all its banal things to say, but it fits to the topic. So they show you what you like. So it means that you never confronted with point of views of people which you don't like. And in old school newspapers, you can see all point of views. If it's like normal newspaper, it presents all views, and you confront it with them, and you know they exist. And in social media, you kind of disattached from them, and you don't know. At some point, you lose them. You don't know anymore if they exist. So you are misled. Same as with Russian propaganda. It's actually not really big difference. When you disattach from reality, that's already start of bad thing. So algorithms have no ethics, and I honestly don't know what to do with algorithms. And I can give you one example where when we journalists in exile failed. When we left the country since war started, we noticed that Google News show in Russian language only propaganda media. Sanctions all over the world, every country against Russia and on the side of Ukraine. But when you go to Google and Google like Bucha, you get like 1 million of links to Russian propaganda media, because they just have no link, have long linked story. So. And we Russian journalists in exile, and not only us, but also many other companies who support us, like foundations and human rights organizations, we tried to approach Google and we failed. 1.5 years we tried to reach them to change this situation, and the situation is still like this. So it's not a topic of education, sorry, but just I needed to complain. Thank you.
We can get back to complaining more about the platform soon, but first I would like to get back to the media education and information resilience questions. So, Veli-Pekka, what kind of information resilience programs are needed in Finland to help us understand the situation, and who would be the target groups? What would you do if you had the resources to reorganize this whole thing?
Well, I won't necessarily recommend a new agency for this in this speech, but I think there are a couple of different elements that we should think about. So first, there's the young people and our education system. So we talk about media literacy all the time, and I think what we really need to be teaching people is critical thinking. Actually, that how do you actually consume information? How do you find sources? How do you actually compare sources? Where you're getting information from. I think Katja's point is great here about the anonymous channels on Telegram and other channels as well. So former Twitter X is also full of these anonymous accounts that push information and rumors, and they get picked up by reputable people and replayed as well. And sort of that's not helpful. So we need to figure out that how do we teach sort of proper use of social media in this sense, that we evaluate that information critically, what we get from there, and do we actually know what we're getting from there, and how do we actually use other sources to confirm this. So I think that's something that we should be building into education. Ensuring that we have free media, I think, is critically important as well. And we do see it's not just about what happens in Finland as such, but it's also about the pressure that we might be getting from outside towards our media. Because if we look at Sweden, for example, and the past 5 years, the Chinese state has actually been very, very active towards Swedish journalists there, and even naming individual journalists that they're saying that are improperly reporting on China. So that's quite remarkable. And we have cases in Finland, like myself, before I was working in government, I was doing independent journalism, you could say. Then I was targeted by the Russian intelligence, basically trying to get into my email systems as well. So even individual actors can be targets by state actors. So and ensuring that we have protections in place for media in Finland going forward, I think that's definitely the sign of a healthy democracy. And also, I think state and authorities in Finland overall. So we need a degree of openness with the authorities as well, and especially timely information, because the speed of social media is so quick right now that if the authorities are not there to provide the accurate information about what's happening in Finland, in the country, then somebody else will fill that information vacuum with their own information. So making sure that the government agency is responsible. So we saw that with COVID as well. That with COVID, there was a huge need for information right then. So rumors were spreading, etc. So authorities need to be in that information cycle and have those channels where they can be present as well. So I think those elements we need in place to be more resilient.
Thank you. And Pauli, what would you do? I mean, drawing on your experiences working against COVID-19 disinformation, how would you make our information resilience better?
Yeah, Veli-Pekka already mentioned that we should be active and being timely. And unfortunately, there is still this sort of connotation that let's just send a press release and the media will cover and people will know. But to be timely and be proactive is more important than ever. And that can be created in a few ways. So what I say and what I said in the government, we could benchmark of what our enemy is doing and take their tools for our own use. We still think, as I said, that we just send a press release out and media will cover, or we held a media conference and media will cover. But it's not anymore one size fits all, like everybody will get the information through one media channel or news cycles. So we need to understand that different target groups, different age groups use different media platforms, and we need to target them on a different and variety of different platforms. It's not one or the other, but it's all of them. Then I'd say that the Swedish model, where they have this psychological resilience authority, it is a good way. France, by the way, has a similar one. It is a good way to make sure that the government officials and the authorities are informed and cooperating. Because during the COVID, there was unfortunately quite a lot of back and forth that who's leading. And I don't mind who's leading as long as somebody is leading. And somebody says that, all right, what we're going to do. But we lost a lot of time because we were having a back and forth that who's going to say and what. And all of these, like going to the active mode from more of a passive mode, it requires exercise. So there is a lot of different strategies and a lot of different papers being made, but very little of active exercises in Finland and Finnish government. And I would like to see on a governmental level that the authorities would actually exercise once or twice a year on a different information levels. There is from Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there is a very good model where they have like a half a day exercise every month. And it's every month, 10 times a year, a half a day exercise where they go through a scenario and they do a hot wash right after and they do the actions right there and nobody leaves the room once the actions are done. So it's not, everybody knows that you come, you do 2-hour exercise, and then you have 2 hours to actually execute the things that you notice that we are lacking of or we're missing. And then finally, I know that we have a lot of good journalists probably watching online and over here in the audience, and I would like to extend and sort of shout out. I know that you talk a lot about the disruption in media and the situation in media, but you need to be more vocal and you need to continue on that good work to keep up the good fight. Because without it, we simply wouldn't know that what the misinformation and disinformation is all about.
Thank you. We can now take some questions from the audience. Here, the first one, the gentleman in the front. And please introduce yourselves so that the stream also hears you.
Mikko Sarela from Academic Engineers and Architects of Finland. I'd like to speak or ask you to comment a few words about platforms. As we know, platforms are not neutral and they have a lot of power. They can decide to stamp down on some information or raise up some kind of information. As an example, some platforms have put down sort of traditional media links because they have wanted. There are suspicions that China is using TikTok for information operations around the world. Should we regulate that, or what should we do about it? Should we ban TikTok in here, or what should we do about that?
Who wants to start? Okay, Katja, go ahead.
I can speak from, behalf of Russian person. We are banned in Russia. We are criminals in Russia. My newspaper is undesirable organization, so it's only safe to read us if person know how to use VPN, because of course website is blocked. But other communication with us, it brings risks to be prosecuted. So that's why I would say that maybe ban is not, just my opinion, is not a solution. And I would focus more on education rather than on ban something. Thank you.
Then Veli-Pekka.
Yeah, so I think to regulate something, you need to have a well-defined problem, and I think So I think there's some definitely work to be done to understand that what is happening with algorithms on social media platforms inside of Europe, and how are they behaving, and what kind of content they're pushing. So I think it's a area that definitely needs to be studied more, and the problem needs to be understood more to see what kind of solutions we do need. But I definitely agree with that education is a key element in this. I think we also need to understand, in addition to the algorithms, then what implications does generative AI now bring as well, because we have very advanced text generation capabilities now, image generation capabilities now, and just the volume and quality of disinformation that can be put forth in these platforms. I think that's going to be a serious issue going forward as well. So I think that's something that we need to take into account as well when we consider how the platforms, how authorities expect the platforms should be dealing with this issue.
Thank you, and then Pauli.
Yeah, it's a good question. I was thinking of the regulation point of view, but I wanted to start with education, since you all and both mentioned it. Critical thinking. Not only when I was in school, we were, of course, a lot of reading in a Finnish Asiantuntija. I'm sure you all were there, but the critical thinking in terms of not only the industrial media and the media that is well regulated, but it's more important than ever to actually teach critical thinking towards online platforms and different social media platforms, because that is not regulated in the same way as the traditional industrial media. And hence we go to the policy making, and I've been following with a great interest on the European Union tackling the American platforms and how vicious we as Europeans are against them. And I think it's an interesting development, an interesting direction, because it's definitely different than what North Americans are doing. And hence, I would like to see that if there can be regulations on the feed algorithms. Because one of the things is that we often think that internet is a one place, but we all have as many internets as we're people. Our all Facebook front page is individual, and it's tailored to us to gain our attention, to gain our emotional reactions, to maximize our time use. So there is not just one internet, but there is as many internets as there's users. And probably your work computer internet looks different than your mobile phone internet, because you use a mobile phone differently than your laptop or computer. So it is interesting when people are asking, or the journalists are asking about the function and the way that the algorithms work, and usually Facebook, like Meta, answers that we don't know how it works. And the question is, should you?
Thank you. We have now more questions, I think at least two in the back. I honestly hope nobody's going to ask about AI, because we only have 15 minutes. But the woman in the very back, and then the in black, and then the lady in blue. Let's take these two questions, and then the last two questions.
Liina Munari from the European Commission representation in Helsinki. Thank you for taking up a little bit the platform regulation that has come from the EU recently. So I have two questions. First, how do you see that this EU DSA and DMA, particularly DSA, Digital Services Act, and its attempt to regulate the platforms of very big content online providers in order to reduce the misinformation and the disinformation which has been spread through them? How do you think that it will actually affect not only the EU, but also other countries? Because of course these companies are multinational, and they probably will have to change their operational model that will not only apply in the EU, but everywhere. And secondly, a very sort of kind of an attempt to understand that you as researchers, or you've been spending all your life in this area, how then a propaganda state like Russia, which is state-engineered propaganda, as you described, that is hardly impossible to penetrate because people really, really believe what comes from the TV. What are the good examples in the past that this kind of state propaganda has been able to change? Does it come from inside? Does it come from outside? So are there any good sort of examples of how this kind of major propaganda has been actually been able to break down or at least diminish? Thank you.
Yes, and you, lady in blue, please ask at this, and they'll answer the two questions.
Okay, the lady in blue is Elli Flen, from a communications consultant from Luosvik at Flen. My question is about traditional media. I tried to ask this question without making any, not twisting myself into party politics too much, but during the latest months, we have on government level heard ministers, parliamentarians, very, like never before, I would say, criticize traditional media in Finland, which is new. And my question is, how much does this worry you? Does it worry you at all? Is it something that we should think of at all? Traditionally, Finns have been more than any other European people really depending and trusting traditional media in times of crisis. So we know that government authorities depend on traditional media in conveying their messages in crisis situations. Will this change? And is this a good or bad change in your opinion? Thank you.
So do you remember the questions? First, DSA, DMA. Please go ahead. Pauli, do you have something to say?
Yeah, throw me to the sharks. First of all, it takes a long time. The question was about, like, do we know any of the governments to back off from the propaganda and heavy, like, everything penetrating, a whole totalitarian control. It takes a long time to heal from that kind of situation. So it's not that the regime falls or that the regime comes down, but if people are subjected to that kind of total propaganda and made to believe that, it takes tens of years to come back from it. I don't know if there's any good examples to maybe Latin America could be one to look into, but I wanted to jump into the regulation. DSN is a very interesting one. I think that we will see something like the lines of GDPR, and that is a good example how the big platforms the American platforms have needed to adapt on the European regulation. And that kind of proves that if we want to regulate this thing, it has to happen in a European Union level, because that has enough power to affect on these multinational companies. Then to go back to Elli, am I worried that certain politicians attack on journalists? Yes, I am, because it plays to the hand of our opponents. The idea of the opponents, especially in the gray area of the propaganda spectrum, the idea is always to cause and try to find division lines and try to find cracks in our unity that they can exploit. And that is obviously playing in their hands when we ourselves embrace or sort of cultivate the idea that you can't trust media. And that is a very like American or Trumpist narrative that the liberal media can't be trusted, and that is totally imported yet again from the US. So it is an interesting thing how fast these things move and how the narratives are same in many Western countries.
Thank you. Veli-Pekka, do you have anything to add?
Maybe on the tone of discussion overall in society. So I think that's something that we need to pay attention to, especially how discourse is conducted on social media, because I think there's a thinking that in social media it's more acceptable to say things that we wouldn't necessarily say to a person face to face, and there's some think that it's okay that people understand the difference, that it's okay to say these things on social media because it's not real. Well, we also do have people who for whom that is reality, and we do see domestic extremism, for example. We have international examples of domestic extremists then basically fueling themselves off from this talk from social media. So I think that's something that we should be careful with, and understand what the radicalization prospects are in this with that kind of conduct online. And on the traditional media in a crisis situation, then yes, we see that already, and through COVID, through the war in Ukraine, that there are all kinds of sources people are willing to use and consume when there is a need for information. And that goes back into what I was saying about authorities in democracies need to be very active and very in tune with the information space, and be there in the same speed as the social media is, so that they are able to then offer the accurate information through the variety of channels that people are actually consuming information from.
Thank you. And then Katja.
I'm a fan of traditional media. Living in Switzerland now, I see that even in Switzerland they are in danger, mainly because financial reasons. And I can give you a very bright example, which can actually easily happen, I think, in Finland too. There is a political leader and a very rich person in Switzerland. His name is Christoph Blocher. He's a right nationalist politician. He was also a member of Bundesrat previously, and he's a main financier of ultra-right party in Switzerland, SVP. And he bought many traditional, local, small, regional newspapers, like unnoticeable newspapers, very small, but in such amount that altogether now they compete with biggest newspapers in Switzerland. And it's a dangerous thing, because he's a politician, he's not a businessman, and his goal to use this media is not to inform people or to do business, but to use it politically in his way. That's a danger, and that can happen everywhere in Europe, because I know that journalists actually earn I was thinking it's only in Russia we earn not so much, but when I became citizens of Europe, and I see that journalists also earn not so much here, and which is not okay. So I think that countries should support independent media through taxes, how Switzerland does it, and it's a good example for me, but they do it with a national TV company, not with newspapers. They help newspapers, they compensate delivery costs to the post, not directly to newspapers, which is very smart, but they compensate to the post, so delivery costs are not so big for readers. But it's not enough, because I see this example is happening, and I want to remind you that the goal of traditional newspapers is to create for you, to present for you objective picture. Here we a little bit different, and our picture a little bit vary, but this is beauty of variety of media. But social media, they also named media, but it's not their goal to present you objective picture. Their goal is to keep you as long as possible. So it's not, it doesn't help you to be informed. And about what can treat this situation with state propaganda, propaganda state. You know, it's a unique experiment what we are facing now. We cannot compare it. It never happened before. Such huge amount of people was so long completely exposed to propaganda. And actually, I think no one knows how it will be treated. But what I know for sure that our readers of independent media, not only Russian, but from all over the world. I just been to the Exile Media Forum in Hamburg, and there were media from all over the world, and I couldn't believe that so many troubled regions we have in the world. And readers of this media will be the base, social base, for any changes that will come. Sooner or later they will come. And our readers will be in the middle of these changes. So actually what you probably should do, it is to support all media in exile, because free media is the #1 obstacle for politicians who would like to kill democracy and go totalitarian way. That's why Putin did it. All the story. Sorry, maybe I talked too
We're
long.
soon out of time. I need to wrap up like in 20 seconds. So
Okay, so then I stop here.
anyway, yes, we were planning actually to have a round of recommendations in the end, but I wrote them down as we talked. So we need critical thinking, we need to be more proactive, active and timely. And then finally, which I really love, because this is what we promote at the Union of Journalists, that you need to support media, independent professional media, both at home and abroad. That's it. Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, and welcome to our panel, Miten suomalainen puolustusteollisuus voi hyödyntää Suomen NATO-jäsenyyttä? How can the Finnish defense industry benefit from Finland's membership in NATO? My name is Tuija Karanko. I'm the Secretary General of the Association of Finnish Defense and Aerospace Industries. Olen puolustus- ja ilmailuteollisuus PRY:n pääsihteeri Tuija Karanko, and I will be moderating this panel. We have 4 panelists, a very short introduction of the panelists here as I speak. So first of all, we have a Lieutenant General retired Mary A. Lejeune, with a background in the US military, especially in the intelligence branch of the US military, and nowadays she is the CEO of Accenture Global Defense. So very warm welcome to Finland and to this panel, ma'am.
So to the CEO of Accenture Defense, whoever that is, I'm not that, but I'd like to be someday.
All right, so we have a career goal over there. And then we have Mr. Juha Moisio. He is the CEO, this I know, of KLOK Group, an SME in Finland. And Juha has a long background in the defense and also in the defense industry. Next to him, we have Major General retired Kari Renko, who also has a long background in the field of armaments. He retired from the Chief of Logistics Command a year ago in the summer of 22, and is nowadays working with Patria, where he is in charge of the strategic programs. And then at the end of the line, we have Mr. Christian Tornivaara, who, despite of his younger age, I'd say, has a very long career within the defense industry in Finland. He is a co-founder of a high-tech company called Surma, and nowadays he is the Chief Defense Business Development Officer at DA Group. So to all of you, a very warm welcome. And the way we will run this panel is that I will give a very, very short introduction, and then I will ask all the panelists for their introductions. And after that, we will start discussions, and hopefully there will be some time for discussions also from you, from the audience. Since the plenary downstairs we'll start at 4:15 in the afternoon, so we will be around 50-55 minutes up here to make sure that all of you will have time to go downstairs and take a seat for the next plenary. So then, NATO membership and Finnish defense industry, and how can we benefit? We at PIA, at the association, we've been laughing with my colleagues that we've been somewhat NATO missionaries during the past year or so. But unfortunately, we are rather lousy as missionaries, since our message has been sort of hold your horses. NATO is not a silver bullet. NATO itself is not a major procuring agency. So you as a company, or you as an entrepreneur, or you as a local business development agency, you need to learn more about NATO, what it is and what it isn't. And as we all know, I'm sure, that NATO's capabilities are those of the members of the alliance, meaning that NATO itself does not procure very much. So the opportunities lie somewhere else. Having said that, we have identified certain sort of what I would call short-term or low-hanging fruits as business opportunities within NATO. That is the procurements and acquisitions of different NATO agencies, or the NATO Support and Logistics Agency, the NSPA, and utilizing what they're doing And then on a longer term, I would say that there is the research and development community and the initiatives that NATO has, but these are truly for the long term. This week, in fact, we have the NATO Science and Technology Office Steering Board visiting Finland, over 100 people. So all the way starting from the development phase, then, from the research phase, then to not common development within NATO, but research and feasibilities within NATO, where the business then comes later. And I always say that the real business, sort of the beef, the money lies, as I already said, within the members of the alliance. So this is my very short introduction of business and benefits of NATO as I see it now before this panel, and hopefully I will learn more. And my first and your first guide to this topic will be Mr. Juha Moisio. Juha, SME, points of view with NATO. Please educate us.
Thank you, Tuija. First of all, I think you almost took the teeth out of my mouth there by emptying the information bit. I think I'll expand on it a bit, because NATO's annual budget for this year is 3.3 billion euros. A lot of money, but compare that with Finland's defense budget, which is 6.1 billion. It sets itself into the frame. NATO itself, as Tuija said, does not really procure. There are issues it does. It does take care of it has the AWACS planes. It has a Central European pipeline to move oil in Central Europe. It has its missions, but as a agency which procures for itself, it is not a silver bullet. And then we have, NATO has its own the NATO Security Investment Program, which is, again, it's capped at 1 billion euros per annum, and that is then shared with the various nations, decided at a committee, is this program valuable enough, and those are then infrastructure programs which are for building harbors or renewing harbors, airports, anything like that, but then we're competing against others who have similar requirements, and from that it derives that then the procurement of that program has to be done according to NATO rules. So it's a very, very complex issue, going back to the fact that, no, this is not the way to go. And when we look at it from an SME's point of view, we see NSPA as a route, NATO Supply and Procurement Agency, as a route to open channels to the nations, which then through NSPA procure materials and goods and services. And I think that is the most important thing, Tuija, there that you have to do is do that. Yes, there's a lot of paperwork, requires resources, requires the persons who understand that, but once it's there, and once you again have a new product of entering that into the system, it gives that access and at least one door. But you have to have a good product, as always. It has to be at a feasible cost, and you still have to focus on taking people, meeting people, nations, for that matter of fact. NSP, again, is not the only way to do business.
Thank you, Juha. So NSPA was mentioned, but not the only way to do business, as you said. Christian, please.
Yes, thank you, Tuija. I have always wanted to say that happy to be back in Finland, and I really can't say it. So I left in February. Finland was not in NATO, and I came back in September, and we are in NATO. Yay! What was mentioned when Finland joined the alliance is that NATO will be stronger and Finland is safer. And I think we are kind of like forgetting that message. So if we are thinking about the benefits that business can get from NATO, we are operating in a safer, more secure environment. This reduces our operational risk and, of course, enhances our control of our future. But maybe in this panel something more concrete. Juha already mentioned about the business potential and how NATO affects that. How can you sell through NATO? But the business is not all the benefit that we can get. NATO is really much into research, development, innovation, and standardization. And now that Finland is in NATO, we can really get benefit of this work and also influence it so that it helps our own goals. Tuija already mentioned the NSTB visit to Finland. It's a good opportunity for us to showcase our knowledge and know-how. So these kind of research, technology, science interactions will become more often. NATO is just now starting the Innovation Accelerator Program, Diana, and I really think that this is an excellent fit for Finnish know-how and technology. When it comes to communication and data security dual use, we are one of the leading nations in that, and definitely there is a potential on that in NATO framework. Another one is 1 billion budgeted innovation fund, NIF, and of course that's something that we can also be part of. Good thing for Finland in this is that these are new innovatives in NATO, so everyone is learning. I think in Finland we are learning everything in NATO, but in this we are in a way same level with the others as well. My personal experience working with NATO and in NATO has been in subgroups under Naval Armaments Group, which is of course operating under CNAT. A lot of abbreviations here. What NATO is an abbreviation in itself. So I was representing Finland in Ship Combat Survivability Group. The first meeting that I attended was quite closely 10 years ago. So we have been able to be, as a partner already, very deep in NATO, but now when we are allied, the doors are really open and we can influence on the things, and we are actually part of the decision making. And I see this as a really good avenue to promote the Finnish know-how in NATO. And these subgroups, of course the CNAT and the main armaments group under that are using also NIAC studies to develop those, and that's very easy access to the NATO framework for any Finnish companies. And I think there was it last week or is it this week, the first roundtable in which Finland is a fully member in that. And I hope that in Finland we really understand the importance of these subgroups and the work that we are doing there. And as General Scaparotti mentioned in his speech, we need to increase our participation. We are now allied. We have to do that. And I would like to change the tone that we are having in Finland, that we had to do something and we must do something, to that we are now allowed to do something and we can now participate. So that's, I think, the mind change that should be. So the opportunities definitely are there.
Thank you, Christian. And I specifically enjoyed you saying influencing, because the panel is about benefiting, but I think I like the more proactive approach of influencing, and after that maybe comes benefiting. Now I will turn to Mary, to you. NATO will turn 75 next April. And so, as Christian said, that with Diana and NIF, those are new initiatives that are new to all. But with everything else, we have a very sort of like a short and very fast learning curve because all the other nations, or many of the other nations, are 75 years ahead of us. Any sort of thoughts or any hints on what would you say to the Finnish defense and aerospace industries that what is the key to success?
Well, first and foremost, I'm delighted to be here to represent a couple of different important groups. First, I come to you as an American, a military officer with 34 years, who has served alongside your service members before. NATO or not NATO, we've always been grateful when we found ourselves on peacekeeping operations, needing to respond, to have the privilege of working with your young men and women, and sometimes not so young men and women. So thank you on behalf of the United States, which is very interested in being part of a collective of nations that work together when they're needed most. As someone that has 34 years of experience with NATO, I started as a second lieutenant along the Warsaw Pact, staring at the Russians with my intelligence platoon. Thank you. It's not too late. You're coming at the right time. I, too, thought seriously about where we were when I joined the military in 1982, and my first assignment was to spend very cold winters along the border, making sure that the Russians or Soviet Union stayed where they needed to be, and the democracies of Western Europe could grow and thrive and prosper. To be back here in this capacity is a little bit, it's sad in a way, that the world does not progress toward more cooperation, that here we are again. And yet this is where we are. Where we are is back in competition about the ideas that were very much at the formative part and foundation of the Cold War. We need to look at that very clear-eyed. And so to have Finland and Sweden soon join us, it's not too late, because it's never been unclear to us which side of this discussion you are on, ever. We know enough about the Finnish people, your own tradition, your history, and your belief in free press and democracy and your citizens' right of self-determination, to say this isn't going to be that hard, but you have a difficult border and you need some friends and you need the idea of collective deterrence. And so we're stronger already because you've signaled clear intent, and it opens up opportunities. While we think we know you, we can't wait really to uncover what it is that is special about Finland that is going to make our alliance stronger. I'm also here as an Accenture. I would love to be whatever you described, but CEO is nowhere in my title. I'll respond to Lieutenant General and Senior Intelligence Officer, but CEO, the back of the room went, no, step away. But what I am is I'm part of a group of global defense advisors. Accenture is a global company. We don't need to get into what we do, except that we are experts on digital transformation across all sectors. The fact that you have a Department of Defense person here today is not, it's not serendipitous. As you think about a new nation integrating into an existing multinational capability, that is an integration and interoperability challenge, which we are not frightened about, but it's going to be necessary to have conversations from a sovereign to multinational perspective of how you're going to manage that. We travel, the global advisors for Accenture, people much like myself, I looked a lot, that's me retouched, but they grab us at the end of careers because we understand how partner nations come together for coalitions. We're making the rounds now to figure out, in NATO's own self-expression, they're driving to digital. What does that mean? What does it mean for them to actually say they need to be hyper-connected in a secure way that respects the sovereignty of the partnerships and partners, but allows us to operate at the speed of decision? Now, you've heard all those buzzwords on the outside, but that actually means something to us in the military. General Scott Barati is anxious to get on with the work. I'm pretty sure you heard that. Because when we onboard new nations in, or we bring in new capabilities, there is a period for the specific nations that have responsibility. So in the case of Diana, the UK has been selected in Europe to take in addition to all their other busy things, to take that on and get us organized. For every country to be welcomed into this new space to bring ideas and to quickly solve, because we need these answers now. So you're not too late, because I'm staring at the defense industry of one of the most innovative and respected countries in the world. You have ideas that are going to help immediately. In the space that you're not going to find 75 years of experience, the conversation of the last hour, how do we protect the information domain? I don't mean the cyber domain, I mean the contested space for information. What ideas do we have? We heard some of them today. What can Finland bring as a point of view, as a country that is absolutely every day fighting for the trust of its citizens against an information campaign that probably has picked up since you have made your choice? And we are all there with you. We are all fighting for our citizens' respect for national security institutions and leaders, because there is a great power and other competition for their trust. So the information domain is absolutely greenfield, and you have ideas because you've been engaged in this. The cyber domain, you understand this space, and as you come into NATO, you will be amazed at the level of attention you're going to be given as you bring your data in a more robust way into those systems. So to Finland defense, this is another area where your expertise in looking after your economy and looking after other sectors is going to be like hugely beneficial. In research and development, I know enough to know that quantum is not an area that you're thinking is going to be 30 years from now, but you're trying to drive that forward. This is another area. You also build some really good systems. So you have an idea of what your soldiers and sailors and airmen in this environment, an environment that not all NATO nations live in, will be benefiting from. Well, how is it that your stuff doesn't break? I was explaining to Matt, I would have quit the military if some country who lived in cold weather didn't figure out the US cold weather gear, because I was freezing for most of my time while I was here in NATO. So your ideas based on where you are and what you do and how you integrate are immediately going to be relevant. Now, you make a very good point. You've got to figure out how to engage. It's probably your first task right now as you go back to your companies and reflect on what you've heard today and think about how do we engage and where do we engage. But NATO is fairly transparent. It has a budget, which it talks about, and then it tells you through councils which countries have lead for executive agency about things that you're interested in. It should not surprise you that NATO is coming to you to help you get your arms around this thing that exists. For companies out there working not only one-on-one, I think I would suggest do this together as a group of NATO, as a group of companies that probably compete against each other, but create a collective identity that allows you very efficiently to share and be transparent. And that might not be your company's best thing, but I heard about something for you that might be really important. But when you see other countries that show up at the NATO trade shows, many times they come together and you see the talent and breadth of that country right in front of you. And as a former 3-star general for the United States who used to come through to check where my partners were when they were thinking about integration, I like to be able to say, I am now in the Finnish space. I see all the breadth of things you're interested in. I need to talk to about 6 of you about interoperability. Where do I go? Make that easy for NATO countries, for those sovereign countries as well. So I'll leave it at that, but I would like to leave you with thank you. One, we have a road ahead, but the reality is you live in a difficult neighborhood. We are at a very difficult time in our history where that promise of peace and cooperation when the walls went down didn't quite turn out the way we all hoped. We are where we are. And we who would like our children to grow up in a nation where parents are not turned against each other for the sake of their state, as we heard from the Russian journalist who was fighting so hard to help this fight. We need your help, all of us. And I think, there was a great mantra last week from the Brits and NATO You know, today, tomorrow, together goes beyond our militaries cooperating, our nations cooperating, but it is also our defense industry that has a responsibility to help. And to our members of the press who are working so hard, you are also part of our team, and we're here to protect your ability to continue to bring truth to our citizens. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you particularly in pointing out the information and the cyber domains, as well as the Finnish innovation and research and development our love for it, let's put it this way. But then moving on to Kari and to Patria, which is the largest defense contractor in Finland. How does the NATO membership look into your Patria eyes?
Well, defense business and defense capability building is a business for patient people. It takes a long time to build capabilities. It takes a long time to develop systems and field them. So let me sort of try to take a little bit sort of longer term view on how the world looks like. First of all, having listened to the panelists and speakers of today, there seems to be an agreement that the security environment in this neighborhood where we live is not going to go better very quickly. So it looks like the state of affairs where we are, which is a very dangerous, very unpredictable and sort of foggy environment, is unfortunately going to remain with us. And so if we look at the sort of long term, when Tuija opened this session, she made a first remark that there are no quick wins. In Finland and in Sweden, there is a very sort of broad political commitment to the 2% spending goal in defense, which the NATO summit in Vilnius again sort of confirmed as a investment pledge. We've been in the order of 1.3, 1.4% GDP prior to the big strategic procurements which are ongoing in defense, the Navy Squadron 2020 and the Air Force F-35 procurement. When the large payments of F-35 procurement are done 2029, it is the interesting question if we still have the political momentum going on that we will actually go to the 2% and from 1.3 to 2.0% is a market increase in euros. Obviously, then it's for industry really to understand and for companies that I represent that makes and integrates systems is what is it that's needed and what is the best way that we can support the national and the alliance capabilities in this neighborhood, because it's, even though we're talking 2029, 2030, 30 plus, it's not many years and it's not a long time in this business. So what is it that's needed and what's the best way that the industry can support it? Of course, depends on how the NATO defense planning process goes. It's ongoing and for the first time in the process there will be a defense plan for the European Arctic, the High North. We've been able previously to coordinate and we've been able to cooperate and exercise together, but for the first time, once Sweden has been accepted, there will be a single defense plan for the High North. And as General Scaparotti pointed out and several other speakers today, first of all, the High North is a difficult environment, let alone just start from logistics. It's very sparse. There's very, very few logistics installations. There are not many roads. So that would sort of imply that it would be clever to have similar equipment. It's not very clever if everybody's hauling different types of heavy ammunition on the very few roads that you have. And I have full confidence that the nations who are planning to defend that part of the world understand this, and that will show in the defense plan as when the capability requirements are derived from the defense plan, and then these capability requirements are floated down to the nations who procure the equipment and the platforms, that there will be an urge to buy similar type of equipment. And then what we can contribute to the security and to the capabilities of the alliance is our understanding of the operating environment. We know Arctic, and with Arctic I don't only mean cold and freezing in the winter. Arctic is 4 seasons. Arctic is forests and foliage and difficulty to use sensors to find things and track things. Arctic is swamps which are very difficult to move in summertime, but very easy to move in the wintertime when they're frozen. So an Arctic is dark, Arctic is difficulty to see navigation satellites, and we know this environment. And this is something that Finnish defense industrial and research base can bring into the capability planning. And partly the same applies to the Baltic region, but for different reasons. That's because of the strategic depth which is required, and it would make sort of logistically sense to have similar type of equipment. So the question is, so how do we do the trick, and what is the best possible way that we can strengthen the alliance and contribute to the alliance, and which obviously simultaneously means that we are contributing to our own security and defense. And this is something which I think we have a lesson to learn, and we still have time to figure this out, is that even though we are in the alliance, from business and industry point of view, the competition hasn't gone away. And we are, like, I come from a company which is in Finland considered big, which is in European scale is sort of medium size company. Finland is not the biggest country we are sort of St. Petersburg, almost exactly as Washington DC metropolitan area by population. So we have to work as a team and try to combine our strengths. It's been said that in Finland we have an issue where we always run out of brain power before we run out of money. So, and I'm a firm believer of that. So we need to be able to play as Team Finland when we go to NATO, and there were several important forums were mentioned, like the Conference of the National Armament Directors and the C2 Command and Control folks have their own fora, and the medical people have their own forums. And first of all is that we need to be able to support our administration to find the right tables and provide information to our administration representatives so that when they go to these tables, they have the correct information, and better yet, that since we no longer just listen and speak, we also have to form Finnish positions, which then will be part of the combined NATO joint understanding on how things are done. So we need to form Finnish positions, and we need to support the administration in forming these positions. And this is something which I'm a bit afraid that we don't have a long culture in Finland, and mostly I think that's not because we are introvert and cannot speak with each other. It's some of us are, but I am. But it's mostly because of the administration doesn't have the manpower to do that. The civil and civil servants and also the military staff, they are busy people, and I hope that the increase in staff that goes to the military and NATO military and civilian structures also shows that we will get increase in country to be able to prepare issues that then go onto NATO tables. And I think I'm running out of time here.
Thank you, and I see Mary nodding there. Did you want to comment, or?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing is that relationship between the government, which is going to feel overworked by all the committees, and how does industry as a collective work, again, to help prepare those position papers and help understand, you can't boil the ocean, and you raised some really good points. I'm just delighted to know that if I ever come back in another life and get another exercise in the Arctic, we will not be reliant on the United States' best idea for how we should survive up there, because it really doesn't work. So thank you. But I think, coming together as industry, and obviously you do this, so I don't want to sound pejorative, but it's something that I see the United States sometimes doing very well, is forgetting the competition amongst you. Focus on what the government, as they listen to what NATO is asking them and what you're offering to kind of be a center of excellence on, working together to help backstop those government officials, so when they engage on behalf of you, and you engage on behalf of them. I have not been in this beautiful country long enough to get a sense of how cohesive the defense community is now. But I guarantee, in working with NATO, you will be driven together. You will be driven together with the other countries in the area in a way that you're already there. It's very clear. And that is going to be really refreshing to the countries that have executive agency for specific NATO requirements, because they're going to say, okay, we see the representatives from Finland. They represent a number of companies. None of us do everything. We all deliver as an ecosystem end-to-end capabilities. That's really helpful, because they're also overwhelmed by everything they're doing. So I think just thinking through what's your operating model going to be when your defense people get back. Do they have a chance to come to a forum like this and debrief you on what they've learned and what help they need, and listen to you to get ideas before they go? I think that is one of the effective ways that I've seen, well, my own country, which has a lot of responsibility in a lot of different parts of the world, get efficient, get focused, so when we show up, we know what we need to bring forward. So thank you. And by behalf, like, you guys are all 30 years too late. I'm just flashing back to, it's going to be fine. It's not going to be too cold, and your equipment will work. You don't know dark and cold when nothing works, and I was in Norway at this point, but in Norway, nothing works. So thank you. I wish I could come back as a young officer and realize this. Anyway.
Well, you are in Finland where everything works, and I've actually read about a Latin American person who moved to Finland and couldn't cope it because the trains were on time and everything was so clean, so he decided to move to Spain. But Christian and Juha, I need an SME perspective now. Everything that was mentioned by Mary and Kari, how does that sound? How does that reflect in an SME everyday life? Are there any particular challenges, or is it just get on with it? Juha, you want to start?
Thanks. I think it's a question of resources. An SME doesn't have the personnel to do all these things at the same time, so you have to pace things out. You have to choose your battles. I think this is what it boils down to. It's everything that was said makes perfect sense, and I think the fact that you have these capability planning and how it then transforms into national procurement and all that. That is extremely important. A very good point by Kari here about that. And I think the one word, resources.
Yeah, I think that's quite an easy question. In Finland, everything works. In SME, we know how it works, and quite many share the opinion that the innovation really is in SMEs. And personally, representing an SME and being an entrepreneur a couple of times, I really think that way. If we again put that in the NATO context, I remember about 10 years ago when I was a little bit laughing that there's this new thing that everybody's talking about in NATO, is smart defense. And then when we are coming from Finland, we were thinking that, well, that's the only way, that we cannot really spare our resources anyway. And in Finland, being from an SME, it's also quite natural because we are working with SMG, so small or medium-sized government. So they are also efficient, and so are we. And we are born and raised here, so it's like this is normal to us. This is nothing special.
Thank you. That was a new one. It's good that you toured the world and are teaching us new trends with the SMG. So have to remember that. Now, dear colleagues, you may start thinking about comments or questions of your own. If you have them, just please raise your hand. Remember to use the microphone. And I would appreciate if before you ask your question or comment, if you would to introduce yourself. However, I will not be sort of pegging you for you to do that. I will go on, and then if I don't see you waving your hand, then just howl or something. I might be getting carried away. Now, since the war and since Finland joining NATO, I've been in a lot of interviews, and it's very often I'm asked about, are we interoperable with NATO? Are we? And what does it really mean? Kari.
One trick to answer this question would sort of throw the ball at Mary and ask if NATO is interoperable with NATO.
That was a cheap trick, but I will give it to Mary.
I was just waiting for that. So we have degrees of interoperability across NATO in equipment and domains that we've clearly had for some time. And I've been in multiple coalitions. Iraq, my soldiers have been in every coalition. I've spent 10 years of my career in Korea. When you have interoperability and integration, when what is arriving on the desk of your president, which describes the crisis in real time, is actually what's arriving on the desk of the president of the other country that you have a mutual defense agreement with. So it's a high standard. Is NATO completely interoperable when you think about the complexity of 3 new domains, 2 of which are declared, 1 of which is becoming pretty obvious. And I would say the information domain as it separates from cyber, 2 different ideas. The space domain, which has been around for a long time, but we're now working very hard to figure out what that means, and the actual maturation of the cyber domain to its full extent. Just with those 3 alone, NATO's working very hard. So even if you showed up 75 years ago, the work never stops. But now we have the opportunity to integrate other nations and new kinds of data, which are going to take the place of classified data that we wouldn't have. So we're always going to have an interoperability and integration challenge. Does NATO have a robust way of dealing with integration problems? And do countries have a disciplined way of accepting the standards and then adjusting? I would say we have work to do. But when you think about what NATO has done over these many years, and what you think about when your service members have hit the ground with us, one thing the military, and I'm looking at a colleague, that doesn't lack. If we find out the situation isn't perfect, we will, under the pressure of crisis, find an answer that helps us prevail. What all of us are responsible for doing is taking that burden of problem solving away from our defense forces and be ahead of that problem. And to think through integration of data, interoperability and security of systems, complexity of privacy and sovereign concerns, and to take that on as if our lives depended on it, because our lives do depend on it. So I won't give a flip answer because it's so serious. And as someone that, as an intelligence professional, twice in charge of theater data, intelligence sharing, with nations we had mature relationships with nations we're often at war with the nations we're trying to help. That's a complex problem that is never, ever completely solved. But we have to have the energy to know that and just get at it and have a continuous way of addressing it.
Yeah, thank you. That was excellent because I'm an engineer by training, but so interoperability isn't just technology and whether the plug fits the other wire. Interoperability is not black and white, it's not on and off, and it's never ready. We are never there because things evolve. So if you look at the technical side, in Finland we have had in our budget laws for maybe 2 decades now the requirement that anything that we buy has to be NATO interoperable. So from equipment point of view, we are very interoperable. Noting that it's not on and off, it's something like from 0 to 100% or something, but we are very well off in that sense. Then interoperability is also, it's about tactics, it's about procedures, it's about training, and I'm not a military professional in that sense that I could make a statement other than sort of like a layman's observation that we are not very badly off in that sense either.
Thank you for that. Then for the company representatives, after Finland has joined NATO, have you seen any increase in the interests or even in the in the RFQs or in the orders that you have received because we are now NATO? I'd like a comment from all of you, starting from Christian and coming down to Juha.
Yeah, thank you. Well, no orders yet, and of course, some of our equipment has NSN already, so they can be procured through NSPA. So NATO is not new in that sense either. However, what I really have noticed is the change in discussion culture. We go very fast to the deep end. People have always been very curious about our technology and what we can do and how the question has pretty much been on that we need to tell what our equipment does. But now military representatives are coming to us and quite openly and honestly telling us what are the capability gaps that they have. And this definitely has changed. And I can tell that this speeds up the procurement process like three years maybe. So we have not seen the 3 years yet, but the attitude has really changed drastically.
The short answer is that we are seeing exactly the same. The colleagues that were, for example, in the DSEI exhibition last week, noted that, first of all, there's this openness, and then there is this, we have always trusted you, but now we sort of trust you more.
Kari, I have noticed the same. Was that a surprise to you?
To an extent, yes.
Same here. And then Juha.
And I'll say the same thing, that yes, it was a bit of a surprise. And people spoke much more openly. Yeah. And you didn't have to think anymore, is there something in between the lines? There wasn't. It was what was written was told. The No, as such, we have not seen it, but then it's only less than 6 months. I think it would be, knowing how long defense procurement takes, and defense programs take from A to Z, I would have really been surprised. However, we're seeing movement, and I think that is encouraging.
I'm going to say, as someone that lived through the sea change of being a military officer who was often cautioned to be very thoughtful about my open conversations with industry so that we wouldn't be sued by the defense industry. There has been a recognition in the last decade that if Defense Department officials aren't out there speaking very plainly and openly about the gaps, about technology that we don't even understand, that we're never going to close this gap. So when defense industry seniors tell their entire acquisition communities and every one of us, we need you to go out and be curious and to be humble and to reach out to defense industry because they're going to lead us through this next phase. Because while we had our heads down on the war on terror or whatever, we have found ourselves at a strategic deficit in terms of being able to integrate fourth generation technology. So part of that is the culture of our militaries is understanding we don't have to have all the answers. We need to come to those of you who are engineers, who are specialized and deep experts in acquisition, in policy, in process, in change management, and seek your help. It is okay to admit you don't have all the answers. And that's what I thought I saw remarkably last week in London, just the level of transparency and senior officials willing to sit down with just about anybody to talk about, here are the problems we're having, do you have some ideas, or please come to us. What I would submit is, I know they've always said that, but they mean it now. So get on their calendars, knock on the door, and bring your ideas to them.
And now, if there is a question from the floor, there is time for one. Yes, please go ahead. And yes, if that was a hand, yes, yes.
Pohjanpalo from Bloomberg News. I'm a reporter and I've been covering this entire NATO application process and seeing the tremendous interest that has brought on to Finland. And I was wondering whether the defense industry is kind of ready to take on this tailwind of attention and sell properly, and what your view is on that. Also, given that we expect Sweden to join pretty soon, and their marketing blitz will probably suck out all the air from the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, very briefly, Juha.
No, they will not do that. And yes, I think the industry is very well ready to do this. We have a very capable Finnish defense industry. We have been working on export issues for a long, long time. Luckily, I've had a chance to be part of the team spearheading that. And I know that with what is coming up, we can do it.
Anyone else want to comment? Christian?
Yeah, at least in our company, in the future years, the sales will multiply, and we are talking really large factors, not just tens of persons. This would have happened even without us joining NATO. We have some capabilities that are really lacking at the moment from many militaries around the world. So we are definitely ready for that. And when it comes to the comparison between Finland and Sweden, I think it would be time to quit that. We know what we are doing in Finland, and for once, Sweden is following Finland. Let's celebrate that.
Thank you, Christian, and thank you all the panel. It's time to say goodbye, and thanks our panelists. And as a thank you, I want to give each and every one of them a Finland NATO pin. Being a friend of mine helps if you're into Finland NATO pins. And with that, you have a few minutes to go downstairs and enjoy the last panel discussion of the day. Thank you very much.